All right, welcome back. This is the Confederation, the Constitution. So we fought the American Revolution, or we're currently fighting the American Revolution, and we've got to come up with a government. So how are we going to do that? All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a little philosophy here. This is called the State of Nature Island. And so it's a mind game, it's an imagination game that philosophers have been playing since, well, forever. So the idea is that you take an island, a deserted island, and you drop 20 people, 100 people on the island, and all they have on them is what they're wearing. They don't necessarily know each other, they don't have any food sources with them, they just have themselves. And then the question becomes, what happens to these people? So we have some pretty famous philosophers here, and they each have different opinions about how it's going to go down. So the first one here is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, he believes that innately, deep down in our soul, that humans, well, we're not actually all that nice to one another. So, like, if you're walking down the hall and your friend, trips and all of their books go and scattered on the floor, and you rush over and help them, but secretly inside you're doing. And that's pretty funny. And the Germans have a word for that. It's called Schadenfreude. You laugh at the hurt of others. And Thomas Hobbes says this is our nature, that we laugh when other people get hurt. And so he says, on a state of nature island, the first thing that people are going to do, they're going to look around, they're going to say, okay, well, that's the biggest guy over there. He should be in charge because he can levy the most hurt on people. And so he's going to be the king. And so the people on the island are going to draw up this social contract that says the king's in charge and he has absolute authority over everything. And the people will recognize that. So that's Hobbes. The second one here is John Locke. And John Locke says, okay, everybody gets on this island, and we are reasonably rational people. We're not deep down evil like Hobbes might think, but we're reasonably rational. When the turtle crosses the road and you're doing under the speed limit, because we're all very nice, safe drivers, that you don't swerve to hit the turtle, right? You swerve to avoid the turtle because it's rational to do so. So that's John Locke. He says on State of Nature Island, yes, obviously we need some sort of authority, and so we need a king. However, we need to be careful because we can't give the king absolute power. For John Locke, it's all about life, liberty, and property. Right, I knew you had that correct. So life, liberty, and property. Most importantly is property. For John Locke, it's all about acquiring things. And he says we cannot give the king the ability to take our stuff. So we need to have a social contract that limits the power of the king. Life, liberty, and property. That's John Locke. Limit the power of the king through a social contract where the king agrees that he has all these rights up to the point of not taking somebody's property. Jean-Jacques Rousseau says on his State of Nature Island, everybody is dropped down onto the island, they're looking around, and then they all smile at one another and they all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, because ultimately we are all noble savages. We're all noble savages, and that we are deep down, we are nice people. This is a direct contradiction to Thomas Hobbes, who says the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. That's Thomas Hobbes. Rousseau says, no, we're just a whole bunch of noble savages, and we want what's best for everybody, and it's going to be wonderful. And in fact, we should have a social contract. This is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We should have a social contract, and in this contract, the people on the island don't need a government, like at all. They don't need a government. If there's an issue that comes up, everybody votes. The social contract is that everybody is equal and everybody votes. And if If the vote is that we're kicking you off the island, then that's the vote, and you have to leave the island. Okay? So that's Rousseau. It's the perfect democracy. Charles Montesquieu, he's going to say on his island, everybody's afraid, mostly because they're not getting food. So they're afraid. And so who are they afraid of? Well, they're afraid of the king. They're afraid of the government becoming too powerful. So Montesquieu says, how about this? What if we made different parts of the government and that they can check and balance one another? So, for example, if you have a powerful king, but then you have a powerful parliament, because Montesquieu's French, he's looking across the channel at the English, and he says, look, over there they have a parliament which is divided into two parts, the House of Lords and House of Commons, and they kind of put a check on the king. Imagine if you had a court system that then could put a check on the parliament, and then the king could put a check on the court system, and back and forth, back and forth. He goes, see, that's how you should do it. Then John Stuart Mill, he's going to say, and we've talked about this one, utility, that's his big word, utility, which means goodness. And so utilitarianism, whatever is the most good for the most amount of people. So that's his philosophy. Whatever's the best for the most. So if, and I mean, you look at that, and again, we've talked about that. That's why we order pepperoni pizza and cheese pizza at school, because it's the best for the most people. John Stuart Mill, I mean, you can take that and you can go down the dark path. You can say, well, you know, if we have a person on the island that nobody likes and we just all vote to kill him, well, that will make the most people the most happy by killing this person. So it's not all fun and games here on State of Nature Island. Now, why is this important? A constitution. A constitution is just a written, it's just a piece of paper. And it's got some rules on it. But please note, the Constitution, and we're talking specifically about our Constitution, the United States Constitution, that it doesn't have the laws. There aren't laws written, there's a couple. But it's not a list of laws. It's a list of rules on how to play the game. That's what a constitution is. Here at the school, obviously, the superintendent has been given certain powers, and the principal has been given certain powers, and teachers are given certain powers, and students. We each have roles to play, and we each are given. We're each given authority over certain things. For example, I can make rules in my classroom about chewing gum. If the principal doesn't like that, the principal can overrule me. If the superintendent doesn't like the overrule, then the superintendent can overrule the principal. Constitutions are not necessarily fair. Constitutions are not necessarily equal. In fact, they're not. They're not equal. Constitutions give different parts of the game powers to make different rules in the game to different people. That's all a constitution is. Now, within the Constitution, it says, here's how you make the laws. Okay, so make sure you understand, Constitution is not the laws, it's how to make the laws. All right. So, if you pay attention to that 2 slides ago, which guy did we use for our Constitution or our system of government? I mean, so Hobbes, who says we need a strong, powerful king, president. Locke, who says we need to protect our property, we need to have a social contract to restrict the powers of the president, the king. Rousseau, who says we need to have a social contract with all of us together, and we don't need a government, but we should all be able to vote. We have Montesquieu, who says we have 3 different types of executive, judicial, and legislature. And then you have Mill, who says we should have what makes the most people happy. So which one, right? Well, the argument is that we took all of them and we try to put them all together. And were we successful? Well, we'll see. So here's John Locke, and John Locke, probably gets the biggest piece of the pie when it comes to those five philosophers and what we stole, especially his wording and how he talks about natural rights, the rights of man, and obviously we're talking about females too, but the rights of man. When you are born, you have the inalienable rights that they can't take away from you. Life, liberty, and property. You have those rights. The government should not be able to take your life, your liberty, or your property from you. And by the way, if you have property, that makes you happy. And so somebody else is going to take that and go, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We'll get to that later. No, we're getting to that right now. Hey, that was Thomas Jefferson. He totally stole that, right? And so, let's see, consent of the governed, that the government, and this is John Locke, the government is there at the behest of the people. And John Locke says, if the government is doing something wrong, if the king is doing something wrong, then, and the people have told him to stop, and he continues to do it, well, then it's the right of the people to take the king down. And then limited government. John Locke argues that we shouldn't have government just for the sake of having government, that the right of the people to be left alone is important. And so here's a couple of, on this slide we've got, on the far left you've got some words, some quotes from John Locke, and on the right side we have words from Thomas Jefferson, and what he we're going to use the word paraphrased. That's a better word than plagiarized. Paraphrase some of John Locke's ideas and put them into the Declaration of Independence. All right, so what's going on? Here's our famous picture of the Treaty of Paris of '83, and how the British guys didn't show up right there, or they left and didn't want their faces painted. And then there's our guys, Team USA, go USA. So we're going to have the Treaty of Paris of '83, and yay, go us. The conservative revolution. What do we want? What do the Americans want in our government? Well, ultimately, I think if you asked the average guy on the street that time, they're going to say, I really don't want a big change. I mean, my life didn't really change from point A to point B when the Americans kicked the British out, the average person. But you got to have a government, right? You got to have something. Somebody's got to write down the rules. In June of '76, so let's see, April of '76, we had the shot heard around the world at Concord, Lexington, Concord, and the war started. So in June, on June 12th of '76, a group of guys, 13 guys, got together here in the Second Continental Congress, and they said, all right, let's come up with a plan. And here's the plan: the Articles of Confederation. If you look at today, we pan the articles. The word pan there means that we deride it, we hate it, we talk smack about it. But for what it was, it was the best they could do at the time, I think, because I mean, look what they're dealing with. We've got 13 colonies at the time, 13 states. Almost, well, I guess 13 states, right? And we all speak English. We're all worshiping the same God. Well, those Catholics in Maryland and those Presbyterians up there in Massachusetts, it's all the same God. We're all Americans. But the Virginians are Virginians, and the Georgians are Georgians, and the New Yorkers are New Yorkers. And they didn't necessarily like each other. I mean, think about people from like Texas, although they weren't a state yet. So the best that they could come up with in this radical time period during the war was the Articles of Confederation. So Confederation is when you have states that are more powerful than their national government. All right, that's a confederation. The states hold more power. If the national government has a law and the states have a law and the laws conflict, the state's law wins. Okay, so that's a confederation. And that's what they're going to pass here. And there were some good ideas in the articles, don't get me wrong. For example, they allowed freedom of movement between the states without taxes. if you're walking from Virginia to Maryland to Pennsylvania, they're not going to tax you across as you cross the borders. So that's a good idea. Now, they didn't allow everybody to cross the borders. It specifically says there's no paupers, vagabonds, or felons, fleers of justice, felons. They can't cross state lines. But again, they're trying. They're trying. It is for established Confederation, a league of friendship and perpetual union. So there you go. They had some positives, but ultimately this government's going to fail. So let's talk about the negatives. Oh, let me do a couple positives real fast. The president of the Confederation, he could serve for 1 year. Now look at that, term limits, 1 year out of 3. The members of Congress in the Articles of Confederation could serve 3 years out of 6. So you could be in Congress for 3 years, and then you'd have to step away for 3 years, and then you could come back. Oh, look at that, term limits. So now let's just move on to the negatives, because that's more important for us. But why it failed? It failed for lots of reasons, and here's the sinking ship of the Articles. No national court system. We didn't have a court. No power to enforce treaties. No power to enforce laws. There's no national police. And again, if Virginia disagreed with the Confederation and Virginia said, we're going to do it this way, who's going to stop Virginia from doing that? Nobody. No power to collect taxes. Okay, that's a big one. If you can't collect taxes, direct taxes, you don't have any money. If you don't have any money, you can't run the government. No power to raise an army. Well, that seems like that's an important deal, especially since, we're right in the middle of a war. But, whatever, it's fine. The Articles. The Articles are going to be ratified by the states. It's going to start in '77 when they start ratifying. Virginia's the first one to sign it. Maryland's going to be the last one to sign it. In fact, they don't sign it until 1781. Because they're going to hold out and say, look, all of you big states that have land that stretch according to your colonial charters, your land stretches from, like North Carolina stretches from the Atlantic coast all the way across to the Pacific coast. And Virginia has the same thing, and Georgia has the same thing. And Maryland says that's not fair for us small states. So we're going to ask that all of you states that have lands that extend way out there, that you're going to cut your land off at the Ohio River, the Mississippi River. And eventually some of them agreed to that. All right. Yeah, just some bad policies. What's going on? During the war, we have the farmers and the merchants and the craftspeople, and they're out there fighting. And the elite, well, I suspect it's much like many wars where the elites, somehow the guys with all the money are not on the front line. I wonder how that works out. And so the farmers and the merchants and the craftsmen, and they see what's going on, and they start saying, we have a bigger investment in the country than we've ever had before. And if we have a bigger investment, then we want to be able to vote more, and so suffrage is going to start expanding. And so it says here the changes in states, liberalized voting laws. More and more people are going to get to vote. And when we say that, you know that I'm not saying women, and I'm not saying anybody other than white male landowners. But more of those white male landowners are going to get to vote. Don't worry, we'll get there eventually. The chart that just says what I just said. All right. The Articles of Confederation actually did have a couple of successes. And so here are a couple of them. The first one here is the Land Ordinance of 1785. So after the various state governments agreed to give up some of their land past the Ohio River, you had that whole area north of the Ohio River, right? So the Ohio River Valley. And so today we would say Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, those states up there. Well, they weren't states yet. So how do you organize those states? Well, the land ordinance of 1785 did this. They said we're going to divide all of that land up there into sections, 6 square mile sections. And so if you have so that's 6 by 6, and which means that you have a grid of 36. Look at that, 6 times 6 is 36. I knew you knew that. Good for you. So you have a grid of 36, and those are all 1 square miles, or 640 acres per little bitty square. Which is, you're sitting here thinking, oh, kind of like, in Oklahoma City, where we do the mile squares, the mile, yes! Within the squares, some of them were assigned early on. They were assigned to be very specific things. For example, lot number 16, square number 16, can I do that backwards? Anyway, number 16 up there was assigned to be the public school. And so you have the township, and then lot 16 is the school, the public school. They put it in the middle of the big square so that all the kids could walk there. Both ways, uphill in the snow. If you think about it, here we are at our school. If you go, so let's see, from lot 16 to the next lot 16 on the next big square over, and the next big square over, that would be 6 miles, 6 miles between school districts. If you think about our school, and you go 6 miles west, you hit, you hit Mustang. If you go 6 miles north, oh look, you hit Yukon. If you go 6 miles west from there, you hit El Reno. If you go 6 miles, coincidence? Nope. The next one is Northwest Ordinance of 1787. The government owns, so the government owns the land. The Articles of Confederation government owned the land out here, and they're going to sell the land because they can't raise taxes. So instead of raising taxes, which they can't do, they're going to sell the land and make money off that. And they come up with this idea that says if 60,000 people agree to petition the government and form themselves a territory, and enough of them get together, and then we'll make them a state. So there you go. Also, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 is going to have this little bitty clause towards the bottom of it. It's going to say this: hey, north of the Ohio River, no slaves. No slaves. We won the American Revolution, and when the American Revolution was over in 1783, the British didn't leave. You'd think they lost, we'd get to kick them out. But no, the British, they stuck around, and they had good reasons to stick around. See, they still owned Canada, so they needed to stay here in Canada to protect the Canadians from the evil Americans. And then also, the British were also trading with some of the Native Americans, and so they didn't want to leave because of that. And so we're still going to have issues with Great Britain that we're going to get around to eventually in the War of 1812, but that's coming up in a couple of weeks. We also have Spain. Spain's not very happy with this. Again, Catholic Spain. They're going to close the Mississippi River. And that's an issue because if you're in the United States of America and you live to the west of the mountains, the west of the Appalachian Mountains, and you want to, say you're living up in Ohio, and you want to get your goods to New York City, you look at the map and you're like, well, you just go right across. Well, no. You got to cross over those mountains. It was actually easier and economically better to float your goods on a barge down the Ohio, which connects to the Mississippi, and all the way down the Mississippi River and out the Gulf of Mexico, and come around Florida and come back up to New York City and go to the port in New York City. It was faster, it was cheaper. Spain blocked off the Mississippi River. That's going to cause problems. What are we going to do? Articles of Confederation didn't really help us out. And then France. They're about to have their own issues, cutting the king's head off and things like that, so they can't really help us out either. Meanwhile, after the war, we have a group of farmers and merchants and craftsmen who come back to their houses and they're looking at their mailboxes every day and they're waiting for their check, right? Because they helped defend America from the evil British, and they want their paycheck, which George Washington and Congress promised them. And every day they'd go up into the, go up to the mailbox, and they'd open the mailbox, and there would be nothing in the mailbox. See, they could have been making money farming or doing their craft, but instead they were off playing war, and so they argued, it's not fair that we didn't pay our mortgage on our house because we were off defending, the bank from the evil British, and so now the bank's coming to foreclose on our house because we can't pay, even though Congress promised that they would pay us because we were losing out of money, and enough of these guys got together and they rallied behind a farmer here. His name is Daniel Shays. And so we get Shays' Rebellion. Shays with an S. You'll see an S apostrophe or an S apostrophe S. Daniel Shays' Rebellion. And he's going to go up to a courthouse with a bunch of his guys, and he's going to cause some havoc. Now, what can the Articles of Confederation do? Well, they can send out the army. Oh, no, they can't. Well, they can raise taxes. No, they can't do that. Well, they can't. This is the problem. The government can't deal with a insurrection, a little rebellion of these farmers. They can't deal with it because they're not allowed to deal with it. The government, it's not in the rules. It's not in the laws. The Articles of Confederation, the guys get together and they say, look, and so this is 1786. They get together and they say, look, we need to come up with a way to fix the Articles. The problem with this is that all 13 states have to sign off. They all have to agree to an amendment, which is different than our Constitution, which says we only need 2/3. But here it was going to be difficult to get all of the states to sign off. But they're going to give it a shot. So in 1786, they're going to meet in Annapolis. And they're going to say, all right, how can we fix this so that we don't have crazy farmers storming through courthouses? How can we fix this so that we got to talk to the Spanish about Mississippi? How can we fix with what we're going to do? And so 12 delegates from 5 states showed up. You're going to have all 13 states vote, but only 5 states showed up and only 12 guys. So that was worthless. And they said, hey, let's get together in May of next year, May of 1787. Let's get together and let's advertise a little better, and let's get all 13 states together, and we'll form and we'll fix the Articles. We will have a constitutional convention. And boy, did they fix the Articles. Hey, we're going to end right there for this video, and we're going to pick it up the next video in just a minute or two. See you on the flip side. Be good.